She thought it was just scrap. When Sierra Baldwin signed the paperwork for a rusted-out Cold War battleship slated for demolition, she figured she was buying steel by the ton, maybe enough to flip for parts and keep her shop alive a few more months. But once she stepped inside that hollowed-out hull, what she discovered buried deep within its sealed command room wasn't just historic, it was personal, and it would launch her on a journey of secrets, sacrifice, and one unbelievable inheritance. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is even more unbelievable than this one. The auction was barely a whisper in the back pages of a government website. One decommissioned battleship rusted, stripped, and slated for dismantling. Estimated scrap value, not much. Sierra Baldwin wasn't even looking for ships. She was on the site checking for old generators and metal salvage when the listing caught her eye. USS Windward Valor, the title read. Cold War-era combat vessel. Hull integrity intact. No weapons. Buyer assumes all risk. It should have been a joke. But something in her gut told her to click. 3 weeks later, she stood at the edge of Dry Dock 17, staring at 887 feet of forgotten steel. The hull was rust-streaked, the deck empty, the antenna towers half collapsed. It looked more like a rotting warehouse than a naval legend. The government contractor who handed her the keys didn't even look her in the eye. "It's all yours," he muttered. "No one else bid." She blinked. "You're serious?" "Ma'am," he said, stepping back. "We've been trying to unload this thing for 6 years." And with that, Sierra Baldwin, 27, owner of a failing repair shop, and 400 lighter, became the legal owner of a battleship. She wasn't sure if she should laugh or panic. Maybe both. Her plan had been simple: break the ship down, sell the metal by the pound, use the profits to save her garage back in Glenfield. She'd haul off old copper wiring, lift out the engine block, maybe find a few surplus electronics. It would be ugly, exhausting work, but Sierra had made a life out of restoring junk. This wasn't so different. Except it was. Because when she stepped aboard the Windward Valor for the first time, past the creaking gangway and onto the warped deck, something didn't feel dead. It felt suspended, like the ship had been waiting. The inside was darker than she expected. The corridors smelled like salt, diesel, and old paper. Her boots echoed in the silence. Most of the compartments had been gutted years ago, but a few rooms still held rusted bunk frames, file cabinets, maps torn down to curling corners. She moved slowly, flashlight in one hand, bolt cutters in the other. A few birds fluttered away when she stepped through the galley. On the 3rd level below deck, she found a sealed bulkhead, heavy, reinforced, welded shut and stamped in flaking red. Restricted, do not enter. She stopped, breath caught. Whatever was back there, the scrap metal could wait. She returned the next day with a grinder, gloves, and the kind of determination only the desperate can afford. The welds on the restricted hatch were old but thick, and it took 2 full hours to cut through them. Sparks flew. The smell of scorched steel filled the corridor, and her arms burned by the time the final lock fell loose. The hatch groaned when it opened, like it resented being disturbed. Beyond it lay a sealed room completely intact, untouched by time or scavengers. A command center. Wall-to-wall panels, rotary dials, analog gauges, a central console with a glass map of the Pacific etched into it. Dust floated in the flashlight beam like ash in the air. Sierra stepped inside slowly. The silence deepened, somehow heavier in this room. This wasn't just another part of the ship, it was something more. On the far wall, a red light blinked faintly on a steel console. She moved closer and found an ancient reel-to-reel tape player plugged in, somehow still drawing power from the decaying batteries in the engine room. She hesitated, then pressed play. The reels spun with a mechanical hum. Then came the voice. "This is Captain Elijah Ward, USS Windward Valor. If you're hearing this, you've entered a room not meant to be opened again. And if you've opened it, then I trust you're the one who was meant to." Sierra froze. The voice was calm, deliberate, unshaken. There are no secrets here meant for the world. Just one meant for blood. She didn't breathe. The voice continued, more personal now. I don't know your name. Maybe you're like me, a fixer. Someone who sees value where others see scrap. If so, you may understand why I hid what I did. The audio clicked, shifted. Behind the third bulkhead on the port side of this room, beneath the navigation console, you'll find a sealed package. Do what you must with it. But know that it carries more than value. It carries my apology. The tape clicked off. Sierra stood motionless. Her skin prickled. She looked around the room, scanning the walls, the floor, the strange arrangement of untouched systems in an otherwise forgotten wreck. She was no longer thinking about steel salvage or flipping wiring for cash. Something bigger was buried in this ship, and she could feel it in her bones. She knelt beside the navigation console, hands shaking. The panel popped loose with a groan. Inside, a faded tin box, military issue, was bolted to the frame. She unlatched it. Inside, a velvet-wrapped object, a folded note, and a name that would shake the truth of everything she thought she knew. The note was brittle with age, creased down the middle like it had been opened and closed 100 times. Sierra unfolded it carefully, her hand still shaking. It wasn't typed. It was handwritten. Neat cursive. The kind only people born before the digital age could write. To my daughter, it read, "If you ever find this, I'm sorry I couldn't tell you face to face." Her mouth went dry. She sat down slowly, knees giving out beneath her. The words blurred for a moment as she blinked back disbelief. "Daughter?" she read on. "My name was erased. My uniform stripped. They said I'd endangered national security. But I wasn't hiding treason. I was hiding love." The tape reel continued on a second spool, automatically switching as if it too had been waiting. "You were born in secret," the captain's voice continued. "A mistake, they called you. But you were never that to me. I only got to hold you once swaddled in a blanket with stars. They gave you a new name, a new home, but I kept this one hope, that one day you'd find this ship, and you'd find me." Sierra couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. She didn't remember her birth parents. She'd grown up in foster care, bounced between homes until she landed with the Baldwins. They'd loved her. She never doubted that. But this rewrote everything. She opened the velvet cloth. Inside was a St. Michael pendant, worn thin by time, and a sealed appraisal envelope. A Navy appraiser had signed off on it in 1971. Gemstones recovered during Operation Tidelock. Total estimated value, $119.8 million. Sierra stared. Her fingers trembled. Below the line was a warning. Not for civilian circulation. The weight of it all crashed down on her. This wasn't just history. It was her history. Hidden for decades in a tomb of steel, left not for the world but for her. She stood slowly, pendant clutched in one hand, and stared at the shadowed walls of the command room. It was no longer just a relic. It was a cradle of truth. Her truth. She left the box on the console for a moment, just to breathe, to feel her feet on the floor. Then she reached for the pendant again. It was warm, like someone had held it seconds ago. She slipped it over her head. It didn't feel like jewelry. It felt like a key one that had just unlocked a part of her soul she didn't know was still closed. Sierra didn't sleep that night. She sat on the floor of the ship's mess hall, the appraisal documents spread out beside her, the pendant still around her neck. She'd called no one, told no one. It didn't feel like something to share yet. Not until she understood what it meant. She returned to the command room before dawn, flashlight flickering in the stale dark, and searched every drawer, every compartment. Behind a rusted fuse panel, she found another envelope, thicker, labeled simply, Op. Tidelock Internal. Inside were mission documents. Some were stamped, classified eyes only. Others were handwritten logs. The story they told was unbelievable. The USS Windward Valor had not been decommissioned after combat failures, as history claimed. Its final mission had been a covert retrieval in the Indian Ocean. A sunken freighter, presumed lost to weather, had been carrying unregistered gems believed to be stolen during the fall of an overseas monarchy. The Navy retrieved them. The operation was hidden. The wealth disappeared. The logs ended abruptly. No final entry. No confirmation of delivery. Sierra pieced together what the documents were implying. Her grandfather hadn't stolen anything. He'd intercepted something that wasn't supposed to exist, and instead of turning it over, he'd hidden it. Not for greed, but for someone. For her. She returned to the bulkhead, examined the tin box again. Inside, beneath the cloth, she found the final proof, a faded photograph. A man in uniform, cradling a newborn. Her. The image hit her like gravity. For years, Sierra had wondered about the gap in her life, the blank slate of her origins. She never imagined it would be connected to espionage, sealed hatches, and priceless gemstones. But that's what made it feel real. It wasn't clean. It was complicated. Human. She stared out at the harbor from the ship's bridge. The sun was rising now, warm and slow across the water. The Windward Valor had no crew, no weapons, no engines that worked. But she had secrets. And Sierra had inherited every one of them. This was no longer about a salvage plan. This was a calling. She made one quiet vow to the ship and to the voice on the tape. "I will finish what you started," she whispered. Not for the money, for the truth. And with that, Sierra Baldwin, mechanic, orphan, restorer of broken things, became the keeper of a legacy no one else even knew existed. She knew there had to be more. Hidden wealth didn't just come with one location and one letter. Her grandfather had served aboard this ship for years. If he truly meant for her to find it, he would have left a trail. So Sierra went deeper into maintenance shafts, into radio closets sealed with bulkhead latches, into rooms so damp her boots sloshed with every step. She was halfway through the upper deck storage area when she noticed the weld lines didn't match. The steel was a slightly different color, and it had been riveted from the inside. It took her most of the afternoon to cut through the panel without damaging what might be inside. The steel screamed as it gave way. Behind it was a hidden compartment no bigger than a footlocker. Inside, a black duffel bag, a stack of letters tied with parachute cord, and a smaller lockbox labeled with a child's name, her birth name, one she hadn't heard in decades. Her real name. Her breath caught. She pulled out the letters first. Most were addressed to "My girl." They spanned over 15 years, dated, dusted with mildew. Each one told pieces of her grandfather's story, his fight to protect something sacred, his fall from command, the price he paid to ensure she'd have something one day worth more than medals. He wasn't a hero in the world's eyes. But to her now, he was more than that. He was a father who never stopped trying. The lockbox clicked open with a small brass key she found taped under the duffel. Inside were the gems, dozens of them. Raw, uncut, blood-red rubies, pale emeralds, stones the size of almonds. She'd seen nothing like them in her life. And tucked beneath the velvet lining was a final note. If she finds this, she's ready. She sat back, stunned. The number in her head was meaningless now. 120 million? Maybe more. But the value wasn't in the money. It was in the effort, the faith, the sacrifice. He hadn't saved these for glory. He saved them for redemption. Sierra sat cross-legged on the steel floor for a long time, holding one gem up to the flickering flashlight beam. "I found you," she whispered to the ghost of a man she never knew but somehow loved. "I really found you." And for the first time in years, she cried not out of grief, but out of gratitude. By now, the weight of the truth was too heavy to carry alone. Sierra called her friend Margot, a former naval records officer who now worked for a non-profit restoring military archives. Margot arrived the next morning, took one look at the gems, and sat down hard on the battleship floor. "Jesus, Sierra, do you know what you're sitting on?" Sierra nodded. Yeah, a legacy. They spent days together cataloging everything. Margot confirmed the dates, the names, the hidden operations all buried under layers of classified projects. The Navy had likely hoped the ship would rot away or be quietly scrapped before anyone found the truth. But Sierra had beat the clock. Now she had proof not just of value, but of injustice. What came next was unexpected. Margot leaked a photo. One photo, of Sierra holding the first gem with the old ship behind her. She captioned it, "Not just rust. This ship still has something to say." Within 48 hours, the story had gone viral. Reporters camped outside the dry dock. A documentary crew called. The Pentagon released a vague statement, neither confirming nor denying the cargo's existence. But Sierra didn't engage. She didn't want the story told through headlines. She wanted it lived. She took half the gems to a vault. The rest she kept. Not to sell, but to show. She began drawing plans not to dismantle the ship, but to restore it. As a museum, a floating memorial. A place where hidden stories, like hers, had a voice. She stood on the deck at sunset, wind lifting her ponytail, eyes burning with new purpose. She wasn't just a mechanic anymore. She was a steward of truth. Her grandfather's whisper echoed in her mind. "If you're hearing this, I trust you're the one meant to." And she was. Against every odd, against every silence. The DNA test came back within a week. Positive match. Elijah Ward was her maternal grandfather. The news hit harder than expected. She'd spent her life believing she came from nowhere, a blank space in the system. But now, not only did she have a name, she had bloodline, memory, meaning. She tracked down the few remaining records on Ward, dishonorably discharged. No official mention of why. Buried in an unmarked grave. But Sierra wasn't looking for closure. She was looking for restoration. And that's what she promised to build. She met with the lawyer. Had the gems authenticated again, this time through an independent appraiser. The 120 million estimate held strong. She could have disappeared, bought a private island, lived a quiet life of comfort. But she didn't. Instead, she bought tools, hired welders, painted steel. The ship became a hive of life again. Veterans showed up without being asked. Some had served on the Valor. Some had just heard the story. They brought scrapbooks, patches, uniforms, tears. One man knelt on the deck and whispered, "She still got her soul." Sierra printed her grandfather's letter, framed it on the bridge. She read it aloud at the opening ceremony, voice shaking. The ship was silent for too long. Today, she speaks. And when she looked up, dozens of people were crying. The Valor was no longer just steel and bolts. It was a cathedral of memory, a living monument. And Sierra Girl from Glenfield, daughter of no one, had become its voice. The shipyard buzzed with energy. Welders sealed breaches along the hull. Painters coated the corroded steel in a fresh navy blue. Retired electricians rewired consoles once considered scrap. And Sierra, boots scuffed, hair tied back with a rag that smelled like oil and salt, worked alongside every one of them. This wasn't restoration for show. It was revival. Bolt by bolt, wire by wire. She'd always loved fixing things. But this was different. This wasn't about making something function. It was about returning dignity to something that had been forgotten and to the people tied to it. The Windward Valor wasn't just a ship anymore. It was a story that people had been waiting to tell. And Sierra had unknowingly become its keeper. She moved into a makeshift office in the captain's quarters. Not for prestige, but because that's where the logs lived. The old maps, the pencil-scratched notes that felt like whispers from the past. Some nights she'd stay up until 3 a.m., reading letters from sailors long gone, learning their names, their rituals, their quiet hopes. The Valor had held thousands of lives over the decades, and now their ghosts had company. Donations poured in. Not from corporations, but from people. Grandchildren of sailors, history teachers, mechanics who saw themselves in her grit. And slowly, the ship transformed. The rust surrendered. The silence lifted. The Valor began to breathe again. They planned a memorial voyage, not far, just out into the bay. One last breath of open water. A tugboat would guide her. Flags would fly. And Sierra would stand on the bridge, not as a captain, but as something older than that, a descendant, a restorer of broken legacies. She stood on the deck one night, alone, the stars sharp above her. She whispered, "We're almost there." And in the quiet hum of the ship, she felt it whisper back. The day of the memorial voyage arrived like a ceremony from another lifetime. The sun rose slow, golden over the harbor, catching on the fresh paint of the Valor's hull. Hundreds of people lined the dock, veterans in uniform, school children waving flags, journalists, historians, and strangers drawn by the story of one girl and her battleship. Sierra wore her mechanic's coveralls, stained with oil and salt, and stood at the bridge with trembling hands. A bugle player from the local VFW chapter stood on the bow. When the flag was raised, it cracked in the wind like thunder. And for a moment, everyone was silent. The tugboat roared to life. The Valor creaked and groaned, but she moved slowly, majestically into the open bay. Sierra stood at the helm, the pendant around her neck catching the light. She wasn't just honoring her grandfather anymore. She was honoring everyone whose stories had been swallowed by silence. She spoke from the deck as the ship reached mid-bay. This vessel was once forgotten, like so many. But no story is too buried to be brought back. My name is Sierra Baldwin, and I'm not just a mechanic. I'm a granddaughter, a believer, a restorer. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was reverent, raw, healing. The ship returned to the dock that evening, bathed in orange light. When Sierra stepped off the gangway, she was met not by reporters, but by a woman in her 60s, tears in her eyes. "My husband served on this ship," she whispered. "I thought no one remembered." Sierra hugged her. "We do now." Months passed. The Windward Valor became more than a floating museum. It became a movement. Sierra founded a program called Welded Voices, offering mentorships to veterans, youth, and survivors of trauma, all through mechanical restoration. They didn't just learn to fix ships. They learned to repair their own stories. She still kept the gems locked in a private vault, untouched. She used the appraisal, the photographs, the paper trail, to create scholarships, fund mental health programs for military families, and sponsor ship restoration grants. She could have sold it all, lived in luxury. But she didn't, because what she found wasn't wealth. It was worth. The Valor's bridge was converted into a small memorial chapel. The captain's quarters became a reading room, lined with journals, logs, and letters from generations past. The command room, the one sealed shut for decades, was left exactly as she found it, dust and all. A reminder that some stories should be experienced, not polished. One rainy evening, Sierra returned to the ship alone. She stood in the command room, now gently lit with warm LED strips. She placed her hand on the same console where her grandfather's tape had played, where her own identity had unfolded piece by piece, and she whispered, "I kept the promise." Back at her shop in Glenfield, the walls now held framed photos of the restoration. A mural stretched across the bay doors, the Valor cutting through mist, the Street Michael pendant gleaming at the bow. And above her desk, framed in wood from the ship's original deck, hung the words that had started it all. "If you're hearing this, I trust you're the one meant to." Sierra no longer felt like a girl chasing meaning. She had built it, welded it, anchored it into the world, not just with her hands, but with her heart. And every time the wind caught the flag above Dry Dock 17, she knew the ship wasn't what saved her. She saved it, and that changed everything.